Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Talloires Network Leaders Conference. My name is Rachel Kyte, and I'm Dean of the Fletcher School here at Tufts University. On behalf of Tufts and Harvard University, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome and introduce our special guest today, Secretary John Kerry, the United States' first special presidential envoy for climate. John Kerry's life is a story of service. As a young man, he served in the US Navy, completing 2 combat tours of duty in Vietnam, for which he received a Silver Star, a Bronze Star with Combat V for Valor, and 3 Purple Hearts. John Kerry has dedicated his distinguished career in public life to understanding and addressing some of the greatest and most pressing challenges we face. As Lieutenant Governor, as United States Senator, as a candidate for President, as Secretary of State, and now as the US Presidential Envoy for Climate. Global climate change is an existential threat, as he himself has said, threatening to upturn and dislocate many of the things that we've come to know, and certainly challenging our ideas of global solidarity. As Secretary Kerry has said, as an existential threat, that means life and death. And the question is, are we behaving as if it is? And the answer is no. John Kerry seeks to change that. On January the 20th of this year, he was sworn in as the first special presidential envoy for climate and the first ever principal to sit on the National Security Council entirely dedicated to climate change. At the time, President Joe Biden announced that Secretary Kerry would have a seat at every table around the world as he combats the climate crisis in order to meet the threat that we face. And as we know, the 68th United States Secretary of State, America's top diplomat in the Obama administration, his tenure was marked, obviously, by the negotiation of an Iran nuclear deal, but very importantly, by the personal diplomacy he engaged in to secure the Paris Climate Agreement. So we're really pleased to have him join the conference today to discuss one of the pillars of this gathering, global climate justice. And with 1 month to go until the global climate talks in Glasgow, no time could be better for this conversation. It's a topic that features prominently not only in our sessions, but on all of our campuses. And it is in the shared declaration from this event. So joining John Kerry today in conversation is Alan Solomont, Dean Emeritus of our very own Tisch College of Civic Life and a former United States Ambassador to Spain and Andorra. Throughout his career, Alan has embraced the power of civic engagement and the potential of political activism and public service to benefit society. Before his diplomatic posting to Madrid, Alan chaired the bipartisan board of directors of the Corporation of National and Community Service, the federal agency that oversees such domestic service programs as AmeriCorps, Learn and Serve America, VISTA, and the Senior Corps. A community organizer, entrepreneur, and longtime leader in the US Democratic Party, Alan served as the party's national finance chair and has played key roles in 5 presidential campaigns. A proud Tufts alumnus, Alan and his wife Susan have been deeply involved in Tufts and Tisch College, and the college's signature event series now carries their name. So with this background of community organizing, of commitment to civic life and civic engagement, there is no one better to engage John Kerry on the issues of climate change right now. I would note that for those joining us live today, this interview with Secretary Kerry was pre-recorded several days ago to accommodate his diplomatic schedule. And I'm sure you've seen from reading the news that he is in Europe attending the pre-negotiations for the climate talks, and he gave a powerful speech to the gathering of youth activists in Milan yesterday. We thank Ambassador Solomont and Secretary Kerry, and we appreciate their leadership and participation in this year's Talloires Network Leaders Conference.
Thank you, John, for joining us at the Talloires Network Leaders Conference. I want to thank your staff, who've been just terrific to work with, and especially your Chief of Staff, Dan Feldman, who is a Tufts alumnus and was a member of Tisch College's Board of Advisors before you stole him away. It's hard to believe that you and I first met nearly 50 years ago when I was a community organizer in Lowell, Massachusetts, and you were a candidate for Congress. And this is your third visit to Tufts University over the last several years, for which we are very grateful. And it's a privilege for me to be in conversation with you today and to be part of this global convening focused on the power and promise of civic engagement. So why don't we get started?
Absolutely. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you. The recent UN report, AR6 Climate Change 2021, made clear that we have to halt carbon emissions rapidly, and that if we do, we can halt global warming. You've said that the planet doesn't care where emissions come from, just that we stop emitting. Tell us what your vision is for global diplomacy to achieve climate change and climate justice. And can we achieve a new way of working globally so that nations help other nations to cut emissions?
Well, Alan, first of all, let me thank you. I want to thank the Kennedy Institute of Politics and the Tisch School, which you have long been affiliated with, and thank you for your leadership and friendship. And thank you, Dean Kyte, for your introduction. I'm really happy to be part of the Network Leaders Conference here, and I really appreciate your focus, obviously, on this. I mean, first of all, the climate crisis is very real. I was on a virtual conference with the Pacific Island states from New York at the United Nations yesterday, and they're just beside themselves. They're exasperated. You talk about justice. They have nothing to do with the problem that they're facing of their islands literally being overrun by water, swamped, flooded, and driven out. And there was a sense of despair. I hate to say it. I've talked to them many times, but there was a sort of, I'm tired of the talk, let's get this done attitude, which is what is pervading a lot of us today. And unfortunately, the climate issue bears the truth of injustice better than almost any issue around. Well, I mean, there are obviously a lot of tough issues around right now with migration and so forth. But the reality is that climate has, for years, it has really discriminated against the poor and the powerless. You know, if you look at where the diesel trucks go through a city and spew their fumes, and why a lot of kids in disadvantaged communities wind up with problems of environmentally induced asthma and so forth, if not cancer, it's because there's this imbalance in the way we've focused on what the consequences are of the choices we make. We have been burning fossil fuels for years, particularly coal, and coal kills, it's just, you know, the reality is 10 million people a year on the planet are dying from pollution, and much of it air pollution, and much of that air pollution problem, most of it comes from fossil fuel, and particularly coal. So we have to address this challenge of dealing with the environment, but dealing with it in a way that addresses the injustice that has been written into the systems for a long period of time. We can't do it at the expense of these disadvantaged communities, at the expense of jobs, at the expense of clean air and so forth. So that's a major challenge, and it's right up there with just the challenge of getting countries to face up to the reality of what we have to do here to tame this beast of climate degradation that's taking place all around the world. So the Justice 40 program President Biden has in place, the whole of government approach that he has dictated, where every single department of our government has to now consider climate consequences, climate impact, climate implications of every decision that we're making. And it's going to take a while to sink in. We will meet in Glasgow in about 30 some days. And the fact is that's a critical meeting for us to get the world on track. Will we get everything done in Glasgow? No, but we will greatly raise ambition and create momentum and begin at least to be holding countries accountable and move in the right direction.
So the U.S. is going to try to get the global community on track. How are we going to help other countries meet the cost of climate change in light of our own fractious domestic politics?
Well, President Biden made a very important announcement at the UN just a couple of days ago on Tuesday. And he said that he is committed and will fight to raise America's contribution to the 100 billion needed for less developed countries to make the transition. He is going to now double what he had already doubled. So that is about $11 billion that we will be producing towards the 100 billion. And hopefully, and I'm convinced it will, spur other countries to do even more than they have done. And it's essential that we reach that 100 billion mark, because the credibility of the Western world is online here for not having done it yet since the pledge was made in 2020, regarding 2020.
Let me follow up with a question that was submitted by one of the students in the Talloires Network's Next Generation Leaders program. This comes from Damba Haruna from Makerere University in Uganda. And he asks, the greatest trade-off to effective and pro-democratic deliberations, especially on pressing issues like climate change, is inequality. As a leader, how can you inspire younger generations, especially minority groups, to overcome their acceptance of the status quo and become effective leaders? And how can the US and Uganda continue to work together to extend the necessary skills and resources to young leaders, especially from those minority groups, to bring about in our world?
Excuse me. Look, this is at the heart of how we're going to make this transition. And Uganda and other countries face this very, very squarely, and we all do, actually. How do we excite our own young people here in America and elsewhere to feel as if they can fight the system, they can win the battles against it, they can, in fact, make an enormous difference? And you and I, Alan, for all those 50 years you referred to earlier, we've been plugging away with the belief, because we were inspired by leaders of our generation, President Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, others, that we could make a difference. And we went out to do that. We did in a lot of different ways, the 1960s, 70s, and onward. You've made that kind of difference through your life. So we have to inspire young people to believe and see that they can make a difference. Now, frankly, you don't have to describe too hard the reasons that obviously people ought to take a stake in this. It's existential. Life itself is at risk. The species of the planet are at risk. The capacity of all of us to survive. 51% of the oxygen we breathe comes from the ocean. The ocean is being degraded rapidly by what we're putting into it. And so you add up all the different pieces. This is the fight for survival. Mm-hmm. So hopefully we will talk about it enough, and you at Tufts and others at Harvard and elsewhere are going to make sure that the classes are focused on it, that the discussions on the campus are focused on it, that the responsibilities are passed on to people, and that they're given opportunities within the framework of a good education to actually be active, to be involved in certain things while they're in college. You and I both were. I think that's the best route to this kind of engagement. And frankly, all around the world, students right now, as they have historically, are leading the charge. Those who've left school to strike, and those who've stayed in school to finish their education and go on to contribute. So all I can say is this kind of event, and many, many, many others like them, and talking the truth, telling people the truth. Don't hold back and gloss it over or fudge. or avoid the facts. I think one of the things that frustrates the young folks that I've interacted with a lot is just basically that, adults of our generation have avoided reality, won't even deal with facts, avoid the basics of science. So the heart of this is educating people, creating a diversity of opinion and debate on the campuses, and asking people to be engaged and giving people an outlet whereby they will realize, yeah, I can make a difference if I do X, Y, and Z.
Well, you anticipated my next question, which is, what should we be doing to motivate and educate students? Let me just add that one of the most rewarding things about my experience at Tisch College was the research that we do there on the civic and political engagement of young people. And the good news is that the generations that are following our generation, millennials, Gen Z, are among the most active generations in history. They showed up in historic numbers in 2018 and 2020. And the most motivating issue for young people today is climate. And they're not attracted so much to parties or even to candidates, but they are motivated by that issue. So that's the good news. But let me ask you what universities might do institutionally to be in line with the so-called 1+5 world, where global warming does not reach beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. What would you like to see universities doing in order to come into compliance, or to help the world come into compliance themselves?
Well, universities need to move as rapidly as possible to be net zero carbon neutral as fast as possible. I mean, that's just issue number one. They need to take steps on campuses, whether it's energy efficiency by redoing some of the dormitories and classrooms and making sure that you're not leaking all the heat you produce and wasting it, and moving towards other kinds of practices, whether it's the food you're purchasing and where you purchase it from, the transportation you're using. No university should have a fleet that isn't electric at this point in time. And I know the argument. I know some people say, well, we can't produce those cars completely carbon free. And it's true. As of right now, this moment, we can't, but we're going to be, because President Biden has made it clear that by 2035, all of the power in America is going to be, that's produced, is going to be carbon free, not from oil, gas, or coal. And we're already reducing the amount of coal very, very, very significantly. So universities have to make sure they're absolutely ahead of the scale on that. And then it's a question of using the platform of a university, which is the place for the exchange of ideas and teaching, to get as near unanimity as we possibly can on something that is as factual and based in science as is the problem of climate. There shouldn't be any hesitation or debate in any quarter in America, but there is. And and therefore we have a Congress that is not reflective of the urgency that needs to be applied to this issue. So that's a matter of making our democratic system work better. It's a matter of holding the system accountable. And colleges and universities have just a gigantic role in making sure that every student who comes to their institution is going to leave as a citizen, as a public citizen. They're going to vote. They're going to be active in helping to make our democracy work. Democracy doesn't work on automatic pilot, and it cannot be as strong as it needs to be if we can't even decide what the basic facts are. What is the foundation of truth on which we're being asked to act? That's the role of a university. And the final thing, with all of the professors, distinguished professors, researchers, the power of intellect contained within a university needs to be felt all throughout communities, all around them. And there's, I think, a fundamental responsibility for the university, not just to teach its student body, but to be responsible to teach the community and the world around it.
Well, the wonderful thing about the Talloires Network, which is now an organization of over 400 universities from around the world, with actually a heavy emphasis on institutions in the global South, particularly in Africa, South Asia, is that the whole purpose of the network is to bring together institutions that are committed themselves as institutions to civic engagement and to educating students to be good citizens. I have to say, I'm very proud of the fact that at Tufts University and at the Fletcher School specifically, we have a voice like Dean Rachel Kyte, who's a leader, an international leader in this area. We're running out of time. John, if I may just ask you one last question about your assignment specifically. Climate change is an issue for the ages. It's a generational issue. We're going to be able to make some progress, we hope, under your leadership and President Biden's leadership. How will you define success at the end of the Biden presidency?
Well, with respect to climate or broadly?
With respect to climate, I'm talking specifically about climate. What are the kind of measurements that you hope to achieve over the next year?
It's key, Alan. It's a great question. We've talked about it here. We know what we need to get out of Glasgow and beyond. We want the Biden administration. The president wants his own administration, and we want for him and for the country and the world, for the Biden administration to get the United States of America and the rest of the world to turn the corner, to accept the full responsibility of what we have to do with our economy, to transition it to the new energy economy. And there is in that a huge economic opportunity. We do not believe this is a choice of major sacrifice or protecting the environment. The fact is that protecting the environment is job creating vastly. We have to build a grid in America. There's a need to connect states in one side of the country with the other with transmission lines. We need artificial intelligence deployed, quantum computing. There are countless jobs, and whether you're a blue collar worker, white collar worker, engineers, electricians, plumbers, steel workers, heavy equipment operators, there is all kinds of work to be done as we rebuild the infrastructure of our nation to be a modern nation. And that is essential for us. Other countries are doing it. They're ahead of us in many places. Yep. You look at the quality of infrastructure in certain countries. So we have to have passed the president's infrastructure bill. We have to have passed the reconciliation bill, within which there is a great deal of what will make a difference to deal with climate. So that's the real measure of success. I think if the president can get these two critical pieces of legislation, and we make Glasgow as successful as possible in terms of raising ambition, that would be one hell of a presidency. And my hope is it comes together in the next weeks.
Well, and that would be one hell of an accomplishment under your leadership. Let me just say, first of all, let me thank you, John, for spending this time with us and for being in conversation with me. From a personal standpoint, it's just a delight to see you and to be able to talk about this. The last time you were at, you might see in the background, Every Day is Extra. And I remember after reading the book, your first memoir, let me say that, after reading it, I was struck by how breathtaking your record of public service was. And that was before you took on this new assignment. So on behalf of our network around the world, 400 universities, all of the people that are tuning in, and certainly on the behalf of people in our country, I want to just thank you for what you're doing and for your willingness to step up and serve once again. It's really wonderful, and it's great to see you again, my friend.
Thank you, Alan. It's a conversation we've had since 1970, I think, and we're going to continue.
Very good. Very good. Thank you very much, John.
Thanks so much for your generous words. Thank you. Bye-bye.
So with those sort of ringing words in our ears, I think it's important to reflect on this moment in time. Secretary Kerry noted that for universities, for the academy, we have this extraordinarily important role of engaging with a generation that sees with horror our inaction on climate change in every country on the world, and is mobilized unlike the generations before them. And so in our education mission, we obviously have an important role to play, educating them to be the leaders and the engaged civic actors that we need them to be for all of our sakes in a world that is already shaped by climate and will be for the next few decades. In our research operations as well, every field of research is now impacted or shaped by the changing climate. And then in the way in which we run our operations, to be organizations driving our communities towards resilience and to success in a world where we hopefully halt warming at 1.5 degrees. And then, of course, in the way in which we manage our investments as well. So there is coherence in what it means to be a modern university. But I think it's also important to see how this civic engagement relates to climate change. And we can see that in the Talloires Network Declaration that you should all have copies of, with a call to put climate justice as an urgent priority. It says that we acknowledge that there is a fundamental injustice in the impacts of climate change as they fall the hardest on those who have done the least to bring us to this point. We declare climate justice an urgent priority, and we begin a new chapter of civic engagement with focus on activities to mitigate harmful carbon emissions and to adapt to climate impacts caused by the pollution of the last decades. You also heard Secretary Terry talk about some of those who really are in the front line internationally, the Pacific Island states, the small island developing states of the world, who are at risk from sea level rise, the disruption to the global economy as a result of climate change, and that they are tired of the talk. We also heard earlier this week, Greta Thunberg in Milan at the pre-negotiations for the climate talks talk about blah, 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 enough of the blah, blah, blah. So we're at this moment of action, a real need for action. And you heard the urgency in the Secretary's voice. It was 15 years ago, in addition to the science, that the first sort of economic report came out. Lord Stern produced a report that said for the first time clearly that the cost of inaction is higher than the cost of action. And that has been then backed up by economic reports from all kinds of august bodies, and is now sort of also adopted as a framework for reference by the UN, the World Bank, IMF. So at this point where our science is urgent, where our economics are saying it's going to be more expensive to not act than to act, and we can see that just from all of our countries as they withstand extraordinary extreme weather events this year, then the question is, how do we as communities, how do we act in front of a threat in plain sight, and what is the role of a university in our communities to make that happen? So please come back and join me for a panel discussion on that topic and others with really extraordinary guests that we've assembled. And so I would just remind you that the next session requires the use of a separate Zoom link, which you can access from the conference shared page. And so you have a few minutes to refresh your coffee, stretch, to think about the urgency of the climate crisis and what we can do about it and how we can engage as civic actors in that. I thank you very much for your presence for this great opening session, and I look forward to seeing you in the next session on a separate Zoom link. Thank you.